into less than Northwest, and therefore, if you look at the balance, it's going to be more challenging, I think, to find the right opportunities there. But we're going to try damn hard to do it.
Would you be allowed to co-invest together? Say you wanted to restrict your risk.
Within certain restrictions, these agreements are relatively complicated, so within certain restrictions we can do that.
Tim, you got a question?
Yeah, a question for probably Richard and David, I think, because we're a pre-revenue startup about to come for funding. Would you prefer to see a business plan for the first time? Would you rather be around to other VCs and perhaps have some obvious constructive feedback fed into it initially, or do you like to support and mentor the first time business plan?
I'm happy to see a business plan first time round.
Yeah.
Well, you might see it afterwards, otherwise.
Good comment, yeah. And perhaps for a brand new type of service, how far do you need to go for proof of market when you can't just go out there and see how other players are actually performing in a brand new space? Because we find that to be challenging that we've got a brand new service like this, so we're obviously we'll protect our IP while trying to do market research, but obviously you can't just pull key figures and facts from known sources.
If I could expand out that question, generally, I think it's a question about, well, how early in the business would you invest? And I would say we'll invest very early. But the caveat I would say is that we've got to be excited about the scale of the opportunity. We've got to be confident in the business ability of the people. But I've certainly invested in previous funds in businesses that have taken several years to get to market. Particularly, obviously the opportunity has to be to the grade to have to be real reason to do that. Generally speaking, I encourage people to think in terms of trying to engage with potential customers or partners at the earliest possible opportunity, even if it's getting collaborations or NRE developments. It always seems to be better to have a relationship with your customer as early as possible. But now I appreciate some businesses that's not possible. Where the right strategy is to support a business maybe for a couple of years before it gets a customer, then with no rules about what it has to be this near market.
I perhaps take comfort as well from the due diligence we could perform from others in the market, some of which might actually be potential candidate non-execs for a business, to actually get their take, and sometimes it just comes down to a subjective view about whether a consumer offering is going to fly or not.
Yeah,
and in that case, other than actually, back to Andrew's point, you can invest at 50 to 100 to find out the hard way by doing it all becomes due diligence. Does this work in the market? Well, you have to go out and spend it and find out. The only substitute for that is to get some wise guys in around done it once before and see what their sage view is. If 4 out of 5 of polls say, yeah, this is how we go. Maybe that's the best we can possibly do.
Bernard Perry from Hodgson. Just a couple of questions actually. One is, I worked with the NWDA and with Andy and the rest of the team to put this together, but one thing that was quite interesting was the statistics attached to the amount of money and the amount of time to spend it, and 170, 185 million, and a lot of £50,000 checks. So you're going to be busy, no doubt about that. Just back to the due diligence question, have you or would you issue some guidelines to potential investees about the sort of minimum and what's really over the top in terms of the business plans, so that people aren't either wasting their time producing massive volumes, but at the same time not producing low quality bids that are going to get discarded Monday morning or in the bin. So that's the first thing, which might be some help. The second thing is, of course, having now started this up and beginning to launch it, have you seen any reaction from any other traditional sources of financing in response to this, in other words, in competition?
I'll answer the last question. I mean, I'm not aware of anything significant. The MSIF have announced a fund that they're bringing out of Merseyside. I see that almost, well, I'm expecting that would be more collaboration rather than competition. But no, I'm not aware of any other significant funding targeted at this segment of the marketplace.
Does that surprise you? There's been no reaction? Or
Not really. I think where the market, private sector market's going, has been going for some time. It doesn't surprise me that they're kind of in a bit of a haze at the moment. Fundraising programs will be put on hold and the like. So, as I said, I think the evidence is that the gap is getting any smaller, and where the banks are day to day depends on who you speak to. So no, I think there is a great opportunity for the fund. So hopefully, if we can get the delivery right, which I'm confident we will do, then it will have the potential to make a real difference.
Sorry.
I can add on one aspect in terms of the private market reaction. I've had 3 discussions with separate business angel outfits who are all very keen to put opportunities in front of us and leverage the money that they can have by some of the money that we have. And that's literally, today I had 1 meeting and last week I had 2. So it's coming the other way actually, quite positively.
And the question about due diligence and the quality of the bids.
Yeah, I was going to just say, I'm sorry, it's not easy to give a one-size-fits-all answer to that, because obviously the due diligence requirements for £50,000 investment is not going to be very light. Whereas if you're $1.5 million turnover and you've got 35 customers and you've got a 3-year track record, it's a different thing altogether. And indeed, even then, it depends what type of business that larger business is as to what really matters and what doesn't. So I'm afraid that's why it's the skill in the game, because you've got to work out what the important questions to ask are, and it's not always the same ones.
I think in terms of the business plan, I think the website, the northwestfund.co.uk, actually, instead of submitting a website, submitting a business plan, this gives some guidance about what we need, the basic questions and what we're looking for a basic business plan, and then it's up to the company to decide how much sort of explanation they need around those basic questions.
Yeah. Well, I think what I would say is that it doesn't need to be a polished work of art. I don't want to read 35 pages before I've worked out the key facts. I want to read 3, and then I might read 10. It's like a newspaper article. You just want to be able to read the first paragraph, get the hook in, and then follow with a little bit more detail. It's not volumes and volumes and volumes.
But do you share the view that it's more about the quality of the person and their track record rather than projections and
particularly with early stage businesses, which is where the gap is that we're trying to address, it's about the people, very large measure. I've talked a lot about IP, but in reality, turning IP into a commercial enterprise involves commercial people with real skills. So that's a very large part of it. I'd say 60%.
I think the worst business plan I've ever read was 100 pages, and there were actually one that said how much money they want. It's not about money. Answering some basic questions. I had to read the whole 100 pages to work out. It didn't actually tell me how much money they wanted.
Just on due diligence, I'm confident that the guys on my left here are really focused about doing the due diligence that matters, not ticking boxes. As Bernard said, there's an awful lot of hard work to do over the next 5 years, and we're not about wasting either your time or our time. And therefore, I think you will find, as I said early on, that people may well have different requirements depending on the fund, depending on the stage of business, but hopefully they'll be targeted at the key issues, and therefore will not waste money, will not waste time, and will increase the efficiency of the delivery.
Are we still working on the premise that the Investment Advisory Board won't have access to the fund managers for advice or even to the investee companies?
Well, I think, we'll wait and see. Clearly, we have members on our advisory panel who have certain expertise in certain areas, and they can be called on if need be. I think that's what it is.
Anybody else? We've got a few more minutes left. No? There, go on, Nima.
There's an old, and they're all saying, there's an old adage that the greatest risk comes the greatest reward. But listening to sort of your introduction, you seem a bit risk averse. And we met with a lot of other London VCs, and a lot of them seem to be the same thing. Do you think that's the reason why there's not so many big companies come out of the UK and a lot more come out of the States, a la Google, Apple? There's a huge list of those companies.
always say that the conversation between an entrepreneur and an investor about risk is a bit like the conversation between a bridegroom and an actuary about divorce rates. One of them is emotionally engaged, and the other one is about numbers and statistics. The UK venture capital industry is a difficult place to make money. If we're risk averse, then we're doing something wrong because we're not making super returns on the ones we do bad.
Well, I think the latest BBCA statistics is of the specific early stage funds as an industry, the average return is marginally 1% negative over a 10-year period. Now within that there are funds who are consistently making money, but as an industry we are taking probably too much risk if you look at that.
Can I just make a structural observation too? Because we've made investments here, we've made investments in the US, and we've made investments in India actually. And what we found is that the US is a big, fairly homogenous market. So a business that we sold here for 120 million, we could have grown for another 2 years and sold for 250 million. That delta makes a huge difference to the overall fund returns. So the size of the market in the UK does restrict somewhat the size of the companies that you can build as easily as you can in the US. Secondly, the costs of building companies in Europe are still quite high. Whereas you go to an India or a China, the market is huge and the costs are low. So there are some structural reasons why it is difficult to build supersized companies off a high cost base and a relatively small market of 70 million people.
But you're surely looking for scalable products.
Yes.
So you must be thinking global.
Yes. Which is why it's very difficult sometimes to get venture capitalists to listen to you if the scale of your ambition isn't big enough.
I did some research about a year ago comparing the top 10 European VCs in my sector compared to the top 10 VCs in America, and just look at their fund size. The average fund size in Europe, the top 10, is about 75 to about 120 million sterling. In the US, it's $1 billion. And I think that is a structural inherity, is that just the capital to employ they have, they can take, they don't need to exit at the sort of 125 million because they're capital constrained themselves. They have the capital to go in again and build it to that billion sized company. And I think that's where we maybe structurally lose out as an industry with the lack of capital, and we end up selling out to the US corporates who have the capital to do the acquisitions.
If you think we're risk averse, I'll actually introduce you some banking lawyers. I think it's not about being risk averse. It's not about being reckless with risk. It's about taking understandable and understood risks. And I'd like to think that this fund needs to be balanced, and that's why we've got a loan book. That's why we've got a development book, and that's why we've got a venture capital book within it. We want to get a balance of the fund, and we recognise that we'll be taking risk.
On your experience, what would you say was the biggest factor then in the risk? Is it the lack of sales? Is it the technology?
I think it could be a whole heap of things. I think as I can't remember who said, but somebody said, inevitably timelines will extend. Things won't be delivered at the time that was set in the business plan. That's just the way these things go. And I guess sometimes maybe that factor can lead to some of the things you talk about, where the funding isn't there to sustain that extended period, and therefore I think it's a combination. I think between sometimes it's the market risk, the market can move on before we get there, or sometimes it's technology.
In our sectors, which is technology and life sciences, we have probably, on analysis, we have found that the most common error we've made is to invest into business when its market is too premature. So it takes longer for the market to develop than anyone anticipated. And that time costs money, which means you have to keep supporting. So you may have an intrinsically good business, but the market adoption rates are much slower than everybody ever anticipates. We're all early adopters of this thing. We're all we're interested in the leading edge, whereas the general market isn't. We're both crossing the chasm, which you need to read. it's about actually crossing over into that place. Market acceptance takes generally a lot longer than anybody anticipates, and that's, if you were looking for a generic risk, most often services, that's the one.
So we've got about 10 minutes. You going to use that time or? Oh, right, Gareth, second one.
Another question from Neil. What's your expected hit rate out of, say, 10 companies you want to invest in? 5 failures, 3 average performers and 2 flyers, or different?
Different for different funds.
Yeah, all the funds were different. I know that.
I'd like to say my experience at the moment of 25 companies is only 2 failures, 3 sales, and all doing very well at the moment, and they're looking to sell a few businesses at the moment. So my failure rate historically is very low, and long may it continue.
Oh, I'll ask a question. Oh, sorry, go on, Andy.
You mentioned before about centres of excellence and things. Do you think there's an argument for keeping a few concentration areas where you think we might have talents that you can collaborate and companies can work off each other with as a strategy rather than just a buckshot approach? Traditionally, countries are good at certain things, and maybe regions should be good at certain things, and we should concentrate on that.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe in the concept of clusters. I don't think it is the same thing as shoving everybody in the same building and thinking that somehow magically they're all going to do better. But it is certainly true that there's an ecosystem of knowledge and experience that can get passed around if it's generally in the same region, a little bit more than might otherwise be the case. But we've lots of European VCs who have the same experience. Europe used to have a semiconductor industry. Actually, it doesn't really anymore. Everybody's pulling out. It's all concentrating in the Far East and a little bit left in California. But even California is losing ground. So these things evolve. And the problem is trying to capture something and put it into aspect. It doesn't work. It's a pretty dynamic market, and you have to, and it's now a global one, so it shifts around all over the place. It's quite difficult to make it happen, even though it is helpful when it does.
It's interesting what the geographic size of a cluster is. I mean, early on you had a picture of the Silicon Valley, and you drew that circle, and you had a sort of Silicon roundabout. I expect if you drew that sort of original circle from sort of San Jose, San Francisco, across the northwest, that would cover quite a large proportion of the region. So clusters don't have to be in the same building or same area. You just need to make sure they're communicating, and you've got that sort of critical mass.
We got a question from Tim there.
What's your, it's probably aimed at everyone on the panel, but really the early stage guys in technology in particular. What's your feeling about companies which are possibly capital smart versus sector or geographic location? I'll give you an example. An early stage technology team that has a dev team in Eastern Europe. So companies can be based within the geographic region. The sales, the biz dev team, because this is where, or the UK or Western Europe is where the customer base is going to be. But capital smart, having the actual day-to-day work done in a more capital efficient location.
Shall I take that? Because I had an example came in yesterday where a very early stage business has already got offshored some of its jobs. The economic argument is that if that product is going to be developed, then the front end, whether it's the sales or the chief executive's office, is in the northwest, and that is an added value, and it increases the outputs that we're all measured upon in the northwest of England. But I think there's going to have to be an element of common sense here that if that ends up being a very small local office and our money is seen to go straight through to the far east, that might be seen to be very sensitive. There's a question there about whether our money is straight offshore. So I think I'd have to look at that very, very carefully. And in fairness, this is month 1, and we're probably going to have to consult. So I'd like to take it on its merits, that one. But we are going to see that in IT businesses. I've already seen it, and we will tread carefully. But I don't think we can rule it out.
I mean, fundamentally, the capital has to go to the northwest. Now, it could be you can rejig it in a certain way that somebody else's capital is the bit that's going into development bit in Lithuania or Latvia or wherever it is. So you need to look at it and to work it out. But fundamentally, we're here to deliver jobs, value added, etc., etc.
But you could look at some kind of, so I know North Star have done kind of ring-fenced schemes where they say, as long as this money is in the region,
it's going here and that money's going there, then that's fine. So you can kind of skin the cat in a different way, but it just requires a bit of thought as to at the early stage to make sure that we're not going to fall foul of some rules somewhere.
Can we take the last question from John?
Oh, hi, John Bickey from FaceTech. I noticed that you're not allowed to invest in retail. How do you address software businesses developing applications for, say, iPhone? So you're effectively publishing software, but you're actually retailing it at the same time. Because something like Apple is causing convergence of both publishing and retail.
I think you need to understand why retail is excluded. And retail is excluded because of something called local market disruption. And that is, if Richard owns a hairdresser's, you own a hairdresser. Very nice, by the way. And I was supposed to put some public money to support you. You would nick business from him, and he's 2 streets away from you. So it's about local market disruption. And that's the reason it's excluded. Now, I think the situation you described is nothing to do with local market disruption. So the fact is that you've got retail, or indeed we're already discussing about some e-tail businesses. E-tail is completely different. That is not local market disruption. So I think you have to look behind the reason why it's excluded and say, does this reason apply? And that's kind of what we're trying to do.
Okay, so if someone's effectively publishing e-tailing software over a large geographic or even international area, then you're not going to fall foul of, oh, you're a retailer.
Right, very quickly, last one.
Very proudly immersive forensics. Are there any state aid rules enforced on these funds? Funded? There are.
We've got to comply with state aid and GBER.
So anything which is looking to help government organisations is out of the question?
You're probably better more of an expert than I am on state aid.
Right, thank you. Can we thank our I've got the next event is 23rd February on mobile. I've got to get that organized. The big announcement is we're going to have our first award ceremony, which started as a good idea in a pub. Now we're going to have it at Lowry. So it's gone a bit upmarket, black tie, the whole works, but we're going to take a less risk hours, and we go for maximum of 70 seats. So that's, hopefully we'll have some categories. I'm going to work out how to have the voting system changes, the whole thing. It's possible if you apply you might win. That's also possible, so watch out for the newsletters.